The diamond was worth more than most people make in a lifetime. It sat on the third finger of Margaret Sinclair's left hand, a 6-carat cushion-cut stone surrounded by a halo of smaller diamonds, set in platinum and custom designed by one of the most exclusive jewelers in Manhattan. Her husband, Arthur Sinclair, had given it to her on their 25th wedding anniversary, and she had worn it every single day since. It was not just a ring, it was a statement, a declaration to the world that she was somebody, that she mattered, that her life had value, measured in carats and clarity, and the envious glances of other women at charity galas and country club luncheons. Margaret Sinclair loved that ring more than she loved most people. She was 61 years old, thin in the way that wealthy women are thin, with sharp cheekbones and sharper opinions. She lived in a brownstone on the Upper East Side of Manhattan that had been in her family for 3 generations. She drove a black Mercedes. She wore Chanel suits and Hermes scarves and shoes that cost more than most people's rent. She sat on the boards of 4 charitable organizations, not because she cared about the causes, but because the galas were excellent networking opportunities and the tax deductions were generous. She was, by any objective measure, a terrible person, not terrible in the dramatic, villainous sense. She didn't kick puppies or steal from orphans. She was terrible in the quieter, more insidious way that people with too much money and too little empathy tend to be terrible. She looked at the world through a lens of hierarchy, and everyone she encountered was either above her, in which case she was charming and deferential, or below her, in which case they were invisible. The homeless, in particular, were invisible to her. They were obstacles on the sidewalk, annoyances on the subway, stains on the fabric of the city she considered hers. She had perfected the art of looking through them, past them, over them, as if they were lampposts or fire hydrants or any other piece of urban furniture that existed only to be avoided. She had never, in 61 years of living in New York City, made eye contact with a homeless person. She had never given one $1. She had never said a single word to any of them, not even "excuse me," when she stepped around their outstretched legs on the sidewalk. This is important to understand because of what happened next. It was a Tuesday in November, one of those gray, biting New York days when the wind comes off the river and cuts through your coat like a knife. Margaret had spent the morning at a board meeting for the Manhattan Arts Council, where she had argued passionately against a proposal to fund a public art installation in a low-income neighborhood on the grounds that it would attract the wrong element. She had won the argument. She always won arguments. Afterwards, she had lunch at a French restaurant on Madison Avenue with her friend Diane, where they spent 2 hours discussing the failings of various mutual acquaintances, the declining quality of the help, and whether the new membership chair at the club was truly one of us or merely pretending. It was, by Margaret's standards, a perfectly pleasant afternoon. She left the restaurant at 2:15 and walked east toward Park Avenue, where her driver was waiting. The sidewalk was crowded with the usual Tuesday foot traffic. Office workers, delivery people, tourists, nannies pushing strollers. Margaret navigated them all with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been walking these streets for decades and considered them her personal property. She was adjusting her scarf when it happened. Her glove snagged on the cashmere. She tugged and the glove slipped off her hand. And as it did, the ring, which had been sitting slightly loose on her finger because she had lost weight recently and hadn't had it resized, slid off with it. She didn't feel it. She didn't hear it. The ring hit the sidewalk, bounced once on the concrete, and rolled toward the curb, where it dropped through the gap between the sidewalk and a metal grate and landed on a narrow ledge about 6 inches below street level. Margaret kept walking. She pulled her glove back on, not noticing the absence of the ring beneath the cashmere, and climbed into the back seat of the Mercedes. Her driver, a quiet Haitian man named Jean-Claude, whom she had never once asked about his life, pulled into traffic. She didn't realize the ring was missing until she got home. She was washing her hands in the powder room, preparing for a 4 o'clock phone call with her accountant, when she looked down and saw the bare finger. For a moment, she didn't understand what she was seeing. The ring had been on her finger for 11 years. Its absence was like a missing tooth, a gap in reality that her brain couldn't immediately process. Then the panic hit. She tore through her purse. She checked her coat pockets. She called the restaurant and demanded they search under the table, behind the bar, in the bathroom, everywhere. She called Diane and asked if she had seen anything. She called her driver and screamed at him to retrace the route. Nothing. The ring was gone. She filed a police report, though the officers who came to her brownstone clearly did not share her sense of urgency. She called her insurance company. She called the jeweler. She posted on every neighborhood social media group she could find, offering a $10,000 reward for the ring's return. $10,000. That was her assessment of the appropriate motivation for someone to do the right thing. Because in Margaret's world, people only did the right thing when there was money involved. She went to bed that night, feeling something she rarely felt, vulnerable. The ring was insured, of course. She would get the money. But money wasn't the point. The ring was irreplaceable. Arthur had designed it himself. Every facet, every angle, every measurement had been chosen with care and intention and love. It was the last truly romantic thing he had ever done for her before their marriage settled into the comfortable, passionless routine of two wealthy people who shared an address but not much else. Without the ring, she felt naked, exposed, as if some essential part of her identity had been stripped away and left on a sidewalk somewhere in Manhattan. Meanwhile, 6 inches below that sidewalk, the ring sat on a narrow concrete ledge, catching the fading November light whenever a car passed overhead. And 3 feet from the grate, sitting on a flattened cardboard box with his back against the wall of a closed-down shoe repair shop, a man named Thomas Aidan Whitfield was watching the world go by. Thomas was 57 years old. He had been living on the streets of Manhattan for the past 6 years. Before that, he had been a structural engineer. Before that, he had been a husband. Before that, he had been a father. Before that, he had been a boy, growing up in a small town in Vermont, where the mountains were green in summer and white in winter, and the air smelled like pine needles and wood smoke. But that was a long time ago. A lifetime ago. Several lifetimes, really. Because Thomas had lived enough lives to fill a shelf of novels, and most of them had ended badly. The engineering career had been good. 22 years at a firm in Midtown, designing the bones of buildings that would stand for 100 years. He was good at it, not brilliant, not famous, not the kind of engineer whose name ends up on plaques and award ceremonies, but solid, reliable, the kind of man who showed up on time, did his work with care, and went home to his family with clean hands and a clear conscience. His wife was a woman named Sarah. She taught 3rd grade at a public school in Queens. She had freckles and a laugh that sounded like music, and a way of looking at him, even after 15 years of marriage, that made him feel like the luckiest man in the world. Their son was named Daniel. He was 14 when everything started to fall apart. Smart, kind, a little shy. He played the cello and loved astronomy and had a poster of the solar system on his bedroom ceiling that glowed in the dark. Daniel got sick on a Wednesday in March. It started with headaches, then fatigue, then bruises that appeared for no reason, dark purple marks on his arms and legs that looked like someone had been painting on his skin while he slept. The diagnosis was acute myeloid leukemia. The doctor who delivered the news was calm and professional and used words like treatment options and prognosis and aggressive but treatable. But Thomas could see it in her eyes, the things she wasn't saying, the statistics she was leaving out, the reality that hid behind the clinical language like a monster behind a curtain. They fought it. God, they fought it. Chemotherapy, radiation, a bone marrow transplant that required Thomas to take a leave of absence from work that stretched from weeks into months. The insurance covered most of it, but not all. The co-pays, the travel to the specialty hospital in Philadelphia, the medications that weren't on the formulary, the second opinions, the third opinions, the experimental treatment that cost $40,000 out of pocket and wasn't covered by anyone. They burned through their savings in the first year. They took out a second mortgage on the house in the second year. Thomas went back to work between Daniel's treatments, but his performance suffered. He was tired, distracted. His mind was always somewhere else, always in a hospital room, always watching the numbers on a monitor and trying to read the future in them. His firm was understanding at first, then patient, then less patient. Then they let him go. Not fired exactly. A mutual agreement, a severance package that sounded generous until you divided it by the number of months it had to last. Daniel died on a Saturday morning in October, 3 years and 4 months after the diagnosis. He was 17. He died in a hospital bed with his mother holding one hand and his father holding the other. and the last thing he said was that he could see the stars. Thomas and Sarah tried to survive it. They tried for 2 years. But grief is a fire, and sometimes the people standing in the same fire burn at different temperatures. Sarah needed to talk about Daniel. She needed to say his name out loud, to look at his photographs, to keep his room exactly as it was. Thomas couldn't. Every time he heard Daniel's name, something inside him cracked. Every time he walked past that bedroom door, he felt like he was falling. They separated quietly. No screaming. No lawyers, just two people who loved each other sitting at a kitchen table and admitting that they couldn't save each other, that the only way for either of them to survive was to grieve alone. Sarah moved to Portland to be near her sister. Thomas stayed in New York. He got a small apartment in Brooklyn. He tried to work. He applied to engineering firms, to construction companies, to anyone who would hire a 51-year-old structural engineer with a gap on his resume and a sadness in his eyes that no interview suit could hide. Nobody hired him. The apartment went first, then the storage unit where he kept what was left of his life, then the last shreds of his dignity, lost piece by piece in the daily humiliation of asking strangers for spare change and sleeping in places where sleeping was not allowed. The first winter on the streets nearly killed him. He had no idea how to survive without a roof. He didn't know which shelters had space and which ones turned you away. He didn't know which subway stations were safe to sleep in and which ones the police swept every hour. He didn't know that the warmest spot in the city on a freezing night was the steam vent outside the laundromat on 34th Street, where a cluster of regulars gathered like a tribe around a campfire, sharing body heat and silence and the unspoken agreement that they would watch out for each other. He learned the streets are the cruelest classroom in the world, but they teach fast. He learned to line his shoes with newspaper for insulation. He learned to layer his clothing in a specific order to trap the most heat. He learned which restaurants threw out food at which times and which bakeries left unsold bread in a bag by the back door. He learned that kindness existed in the strangest places, in the dollar pressed into his hand by a teenager on the subway, in the cup of coffee left on a bench with a post-it note that said, "For you," in the nod from a security guard who pretended not to see him sleeping in the lobby of a bank at 3 in the morning. He also learned the other thing, the thing that nobody tells you about homelessness until you're living it. The invisibility, not the metaphorical kind, the literal, physical sensation of people's eyes sliding off you like water off glass. Of watching a crowded sidewalk part around you like a river around a stone, everyone adjusting their path to avoid coming within 3 feet of you, as if poverty were contagious, as if sadness could be caught like a cold. That was the thing that hurt the most, not the hunger, not the cold, the invisibility. He ended up on the streets not because of alcohol or drugs or mental illness or any of the convenient explanations that comfortable people use to justify their indifference. He ended up on the streets because life had taken everything from him, one piece at a time, with the patient cruelty of a cat playing with a mouse. And yet, Thomas Aidan Whitfield was not a broken man. Worn down, yes. Exhausted, certainly. Grieving, always. But not broken. There was something in him, some core of decency that the streets had not been able to erode, that kept him human when everything around him conspired to make him less than that. He said please and thank you. He held doors for people, even people who looked through him as if he wasn't there. He picked up litter when he saw it. He gave directions to tourists. He shared his food with other people who had nothing, because he understood that when you've lost everything, the only thing you have left to give is kindness. He still carried, in a worn plastic bag that he guarded with his life, 3 things. A photograph of Daniel smiling in a hospital gown, bald from chemo, but grinning like the world was a gift. A letter from Sarah, written the day she left, telling him she would always love him and that none of this was his fault. And his professional engineering license, expired but still bearing his name and his credentials and the seal of the state of New York. These 3 things were his identity. Without them, he was nobody. With them, he was a father, a husband, and a man who had once built things that mattered. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon when Thomas noticed something glinting near the grate. The light was fading fast, the way it does in November in New York, and the streetlights were just beginning to flicker on. He had been sitting on his cardboard for most of the afternoon. watching the parade of legs and shoes that passed in front of him, and he was about to start packing up his spot to head to the shelter on Lexington when the glint caught his eye. It was coming from the gap between the sidewalk and the metal grate. A small sharp flash of light, like a tiny star, had fallen from the sky and gotten stuck in the crack. He leaned over and looked closer. Then he reached down carefully and worked his fingers into the narrow gap. He felt something small and hard and smooth. He pinched it between his thumb and forefinger and pulled it out. It was a ring. Even in the fading light, even with eyes that hadn't seen an optometrist in 6 years, Thomas could tell this was not an ordinary ring. The stone was enormous. It caught what little light remained and threw it back in a cascade of tiny rainbows that danced across his dirty fingers. The band was heavy, substantial, the kind of weight that meant real metal, not costume jewelry or plated brass. He turned it over in his hand. On the inside of the band, there was an engraving. He held it up to the streetlight and squinted. M&A, 25 years, forever isn't long enough. Thomas sat there for a long time, holding the ring in his open palm, staring at it. He could feel its weight, not just the physical weight, though that was considerable. The other weight, the weight of what it meant. The weight of 25 years and a promise and a love that someone had tried to capture in platinum and diamond, and an engraving that would outlast them both. He thought about Sarah. He thought about their wedding rings, simple gold bands that they had bought at a jewelry store in the East Village when they were 26 years old and broke, and so in love that the whole world seemed like it existed just for them. He wondered if Sarah still had hers. He had lost his somewhere in the transition from apartment to shelter to street. One more thing swallowed up by the machinery of loss. He closed his fingers around the ring and held it against his chest. Then he stood up, folded his cardboard, tucked it under his arm, and started walking. He didn't think about keeping it, not for a second. Not for a fraction of a second. The thought simply never entered his mind. It wasn't his. It belonged to someone who was probably right now turning their house upside down looking for it. Someone whose heart was racing and whose stomach was churning, and who was making desperate phone calls and retracing their steps in their mind. He knew what loss felt like. He knew it better than almost anyone alive. And he was not going to be the cause of someone else's. But there was a moment, a brief, honest human moment, when he looked at that ring and understood what it could mean for him. A pawn shop would give him thousands, maybe tens of thousands, without asking questions. That money could buy him a room for a year, real food, new clothes, a phone, maybe even enough to get his license renewed and start looking for work again. That ring, sitting in his dirty palm, was a key that could unlock a door he had been standing outside of for 6 years. And yet the engraving said, "Forever isn't long enough." And yet someone, somewhere, had chosen those words because they meant something, because they captured a feeling that was bigger than platinum and diamonds and money. And Thomas knew, in the deepest part of himself, that a man who sells another person's love to save himself is not a man who deserves saving. Daniel would have returned it without hesitation, without debate. His 17-year-old son dying in a hospital bed would have held out that ring to its owner and smiled and said something kind. Thomas was sure of it, and if his dead son could be that good, then his living father had no excuse to be anything less. The question was how to return it. He didn't have a phone. He didn't have internet access. He couldn't exactly walk into a police station looking the way he looked and hand over a ring worth what he guessed was several $100,000 without being accused of stealing it. So, he did the only thing he could think of. He walked to the public library on 42nd Street, where they let homeless people sit in the reading room as long as they were quiet, and he used one of the public computers to search for lost ring reports in Manhattan. It took him 45 minutes. His computer skills were rusty, and the library's internet was slow, and he kept getting distracted by pop-up ads and news articles and the sheer overwhelming enormity of the internet, which had grown and changed and mutated in the years since he had last been a regular user. But eventually he found it. A post on a neighborhood social media group for the Upper East Side. A woman named Margaret Sinclair, a 6-carat cushion-cut diamond ring, lost somewhere between Madison Avenue and Park Avenue on Tuesday afternoon. $10,000 reward. There was a photo of the ring. Thomas held the actual ring up next to the screen. It was a match. There was also an address, the brownstone on the Upper East Side. Thomas looked at the address. He looked at the ring. He looked at the $10,000 reward offer, and he felt something that surprised him. It wasn't excitement about the money, though $10,000 would change his life in ways that were hard to even imagine. A room. A real room, with a door and a bed and a lock. New clothes. Food that didn't come from a shelter or a dumpster. Maybe even enough to get back on his feet to start the long climb back towards something resembling a life. What he felt was something simpler. He felt the satisfaction of knowing what he was going to do, the clarity of a situation with only one right answer. In a life that had been consumed by ambiguity and loss and the terrible randomness of suffering, here was something clean and clear and good. He was going to return the ring, and that was that. He walked from the library to the Upper East Side. It took him an hour and 20 minutes. His shoes were falling apart, and his feet ached, and the November wind was picking up, driving the temperature down into the low 30s. He passed hundreds of people on the way, and not one of them looked at him. Not one of them saw the diamond ring in his coat pocket that was worth more than their car. Not one of them had any idea that the most honest man in Manhattan was walking among them in rags. As he crossed from Midtown into the Upper East Side, the world around him changed. The sidewalks got cleaner, the buildings got taller and quieter, the people got better dressed. The doormen in their uniforms stood straighter, the cars parked. Along the curb were German and British, and cost more than Thomas had made in a year when he was employed. He was entering a world that had no place for him. A world that would look at him and see only what was wrong with him, not what was right. A world that measured human beings by what they owned, not by what they carried in their hearts. He kept walking anyway. He reached the brownstone at 6:45 in the evening. It was a beautiful building, limestone facade, black iron railings, tall windows with heavy curtains, the kind of building that whispered old money from every brick. Thomas climbed the steps to the front door. He took a breath. He rang the bell. Margaret Sinclair opened the door herself. She was wearing a silk blouse and black slacks, and the expression of a woman who was expecting a delivery, or possibly a neighbor, or really anyone other than what she found. A homeless man on her doorstep, in the dark. Her face went through a rapid sequence of emotions. Surprise, confusion, disgust, fear. Her hand moved to the door, ready to slam it shut. Her body shifted backward, creating distance. Her chin lifted, the way it always did when she was looking down at someone she considered beneath her. "What do you want?" she said, and her voice was ice. Thomas didn't flinch. He had been spoken to in that tone 1,000 times. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just the sound the world made when it looked at him and saw nothing worth seeing. "Ma'am, I found something that I believe belongs to you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the ring. He held it out to her on his open palm, the way you might offer a treat to a frightened animal. Margaret looked at the ring. Then she looked at Thomas. Then she looked at the ring again. And then she screamed. Not a scream of joy, not a scream of relief. A scream of terror, a raw, piercing shriek that echoed off the limestone facades of the neighboring brownstones and brought lights on in windows up and down the block. She stumbled backward into the hallway, fumbling for her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly that she nearly dropped it. "Police! I need the police! There's a man at my door. He has my ring. He stole my ring." Thomas stood on the doorstep, his hand still outstretched, the ring still sitting on his open palm, and he felt something collapse inside him. Not surprise. He wasn't surprised. Some part of him had known this was a possibility. Some part of him had understood, even as he walked those 80 blocks in the cold, that the world does not reward goodness the way stories say it does. That a homeless man showing up at a rich woman's door with a priceless ring was not a heartwarming scene. It was a threat. But knowing it was possible and experiencing it were two different things. The scream hit him like a physical blow. The accusation, the immediate reflexive assumption that he was a thief, that he had come to rob her, that his very presence on her doorstep was a crime, landed in his chest like a stone. He set the ring down on the doorstep, carefully, gently, the way you set down something precious that doesn't belong to you. Then he turned around and walked down the steps. He had made it about 20 feet when the first police car arrived. The siren cut through the quiet street like a scalpel. 2 officers jumped out. One of them grabbed Thomas by the arm, the other drew his weapon. "On the ground! Now! Get on the ground!" Thomas got on the ground. He lay face down on the cold sidewalk with his hands behind his head, and he didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't say a word, because he knew, from 6 years of living in a body that the world saw as dangerous simply because it was dirty and poor, that words didn't matter in moments like this. Only compliance mattered, only stillness, only making yourself as small and unthreatening as possible, and hoping that the people with the power didn't decide to hurt you. They handcuffed him. They searched him. They found his plastic bag with the photograph and the letter and the expired license. One of the officers looked at the license and then looked at Thomas, as if trying to reconcile the clean-shaven professional in the photo with the bearded, weathered man on the ground. Margaret had come out of the brownstone. She was standing at the top of the steps, clutching the ring, her face a mask of righteous fury. "He stole it. He came to my door with my ring. He must have followed me and taken it off my hand." One of the officers, a young man with a crew cut and careful eyes, looked at Thomas. "Sir, do you want to tell us what happened?" Thomas looked up from the sidewalk. His cheek was pressed against the cold concrete. He could feel a small rock digging into his jaw. He could see Margaret's expensive shoes at the top of the steps and the officer's boots next to his face. And the whole scene had the quality of a dream. The kind of dream where you're trying to explain something important, but nobody can hear you. "I found the ring on the sidewalk near a grate on Madison Avenue," he said. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had lost so much that one more indignity was just a drop in an ocean. "I looked it up at the public library. I found her post online offering a reward. I walked here to return it. That's all." "He's lying." Margaret's voice was shrill. "Look at him. Why would someone like that return something like this? Someone like that." 3 words. 3 words that contained an entire worldview, an entire philosophy of human nature, an entire system of belief about who had value and who didn't, who was capable of honesty and who wasn't, who deserved the benefit of the doubt and who deserved the back of a hand. Someone like that. The officer with the crew cut, whose name was Marcus Webb, was 28 years old. He had been on the force for 4 years. He had grown up in the Bronx, the son of a bus driver and a home health aide, and he had seen enough of the world to know that character and circumstance are not the same thing, that a man's clothes do not tell you who he is, that the loudest voice in the room is not always the truthful one. He looked at Margaret. He looked at Thomas. He looked at the ring, now clutched in Margaret's fist like a weapon. "Ma'am, can you describe exactly how you lost the ring?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? Did someone take it from you? Did you see this man take it?" "No, I lost it on the street, but he must have found it and followed me. He must have been watching me." Officer Webb nodded slowly. "So you lost the ring, and this man found it, and he brought it to your door. Is that correct?" The silence that followed was devastating. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish that had been pulled from the water and was struggling to understand why it couldn't breathe. "Well, yes, but look at him. He could have stolen it. How do I know he didn't steal it? Because he brought it back, ma'am." 5 words. 5 words that cut through the noise and the assumptions and the fear and the prejudice and landed on the simple, undeniable truth. He brought it back. A man with nothing in the world, a man who could have sold that ring and changed his life forever, had walked 80 blocks in the cold to return it to a woman who screamed at the sight of him. Officer Webb knelt down and uncuffed Thomas. He helped him to his feet. He brushed the dirt off his coat with a gentleness that Thomas hadn't experienced from another human being in a very long time. "You're free to go, sir. You haven't done anything wrong." Thomas nodded. He picked up his plastic bag, which had been tossed to the ground during the search. He checked inside. The photograph, the letter, the license, all still there. He turned to walk away. Wait, it was Margaret's voice, but it sounded different now. Smaller, thinner, like the air had been let out of it. Thomas stopped. He didn't turn around. "The reward. You came for the reward. Let me get my checkbook." Thomas stood very still for a moment. The wind blew down the street, carrying the smell of exhaust and cold stone and the distant sound of traffic on the avenue. He could feel the officers watching him. He could feel Margaret watching him from the top of the steps. He could feel the weight of the moment, the fullness of it, the way it balanced on a single point like a coin on its edge. "Keep it," he said, and he walked away. He made it to the corner before his legs started to shake. He leaned against a lamppost and breathed, in and out, in and out. The cold air burned his lungs, but it felt clean. It felt honest. It felt like the first real breath he had taken in a long time. He had done the right thing. It hadn't mattered. The world had punished him for it, and he had walked away with nothing. But he had also walked away with something that Margaret Sinclair, with all her money and her brownstone and her 6-carat ring, would never have. He walked away with himself. Officer Marcus Webb went home that night and couldn't sleep. He lay in bed in his apartment in Astoria, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man on the sidewalk, the calm in his voice, the dignity in his posture, even face down on the concrete with his hands cuffed behind his back, the way he had said, "Keep it," and walked away, as if the $10,000 was an insult to something far more valuable. Marcus had seen a lot of things in 4 years on the force. Domestic disputes, drug busts, traffic fatalities, the daily parade of human suffering that is the reality of police work in a city of 8 million people. He had developed the thick skin that the job demands, the ability to compartmentalize, to process, to move on. But this one stuck with him. This one dug in like a splinter and wouldn't let go. The next morning, he did something he had never done before. He used the department's database to look up the name on the expired engineering license. Thomas Aiden Whitfield. He found an old address in Brooklyn, a work history, a marriage record, a death certificate for a minor named Daniel Thomas Whitfield, age 17, cause of death, acute myeloid leukemia. He sat at his desk for a long time staring at the screen. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. The call was to his cousin, Denise, who worked as a case manager at a nonprofit called Bridge to Home. It was an organization that specialized in helping homeless individuals who had professional backgrounds get back on their feet. They provided housing, job placement, counseling, and most importantly, they provided the kind of sustained patient support that the system was designed to provide but rarely did. "I have someone for you," Marcus said. "Structural engineer. 6 years on the street, lost his son to cancer. He's the most decent human being I've ever met. Send him to me," Denise said. Finding Thomas again took Marcus 3 days. He walked the blocks between Madison and Lexington, checking the usual spots, the doorways and the benches and the grates where the warm air rises from the subway. He asked other homeless people if they knew a man named Thomas. Most shrugged. Some pointed vaguely downtown. One woman, a skinny girl with dreadlocks and kind eyes, said she thought she knew who he meant and told Marcus to try the library. He found him at the public library on 42nd Street, sitting in the reading room, reading a copy of Engineering News Record that was 3 months old. Marcus sat down across from him. Thomas looked up, recognized the officer, and his expression shifted. Not fear, not hostility, something more like resignation. The look of a man who has been surprised by the world too many times to expect anything good from it. "I'm not here to arrest you," Marcus said. "I didn't think you were. I'm here because I know someone who can help you." Thomas looked at him for a long time. 6 years on the street had taught him to be suspicious of help. Help usually came with conditions, with paperwork, with waiting lists and eligibility requirements, and the ever-present threat of falling through the cracks of a system that had more cracks than surface. "Why?" Thomas asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Because the other night, I watched you do something that most people wouldn't do. You found a ring worth a fortune, and you walked 80 blocks in the cold to give it back to a woman who called the cops on you, and then you turned down the reward money and walked away." He paused. "In my job, I see the worst of people every day. What you did was the best of people, and I figure the best of people deserves a shot." Thomas looked down at the magazine in his hands. The pages were wrinkled and coffee-stained, and someone had torn out the crossword puzzle. He could feel something building in his chest, something warm and unfamiliar, like the first crocus of spring pushing through frozen ground. "Okay," he said. Denise was good at her job. She was patient and thorough, and she understood that rebuilding a life is not a single event, but a process, a long series of small steps, each one harder than it looks from the outside. She got Thomas into a transitional housing unit in East Harlem, a small room with a bed and a desk and a window that looked out onto a fire escape. It wasn't much, but it had a door that locked and heat that worked and a roof that didn't leak. And for a man who had spent 6 years sleeping on cardboard and concrete, it felt like a palace. She helped him get new identification, a new social security card, a state ID. She helped him file for back benefits he was owed. She connected him with a therapist who specialized in grief and loss and the particular trauma of long-term homelessness. And she helped him get his engineering license renewed. That was the part that took the longest. 6 years of lapsed credentials, 6 years of continuing education requirements that hadn't been met. 6 years of technological changes in the field, new codes, new software, new methods, new materials. It was like learning to speak a language you once knew fluently, but hadn't used in years. The grammar was still there, buried somewhere deep, but the vocabulary had changed. Thomas studied. He studied like a man possessed. He sat at the desk in his small room in East Harlem and read textbooks and watched online lectures and took practice exams and filled notebooks with calculations and diagrams. He studied the way he had studied in college, with the focused intensity of someone who understands that knowledge is not just information, but identity, that what you know is part of who you are. He passed the licensing exam on his first attempt. Denise called Marcus to tell him. Marcus, who was sitting in his patrol car outside a bodega in the Bronx, gripped the steering wheel and smiled so wide that his partner asked him if he was having a stroke. Thomas got a job at a small engineering firm in Midtown, not his old firm, a different one, smaller, hungrier, run by a woman named Patricia Chen who had started the company in her living room 20 years ago and had built it into a respected niche practice specializing in the structural rehabilitation of aging buildings. His first day at the firm was terrifying. He stood outside the building for 10 minutes before he could make himself go in. He was wearing new clothes, bought with the last of his transitional housing stipend, a button-down shirt, slacks, real shoes. He had shaved that morning and cut his nails and stared at himself in the mirror for a long time, trying to see the engineer behind the years of weathering. When he walked through the door, Patricia met him in the lobby with a handshake and a cup of coffee, and a directness that he found immediately reassuring. "I don't care where you've been," she said. "I care about what you can do. Show me what you can do." So he did. His first project was a structural assessment of a pre-war apartment building in the Bronx that had been flagged for potential foundation issues. He spent 3 days on site, crawling through basements and utility corridors, examining load-bearing walls and column connections, and the subtle signs of stress that most engineers would miss. He produced a report that was so thorough, so detailed, so precisely written that Patricia read it twice and then called him into her office to ask where he had been hiding for the past 6 years. He told her, not everything, but enough. She listened without interrupting, and when he was finished, she nodded once and said, "Well, you're here now. That's what matters." It was the simplest thing anyone had ever said to him, and it was exactly right. Patricia didn't care about the 6-year gap on Thomas's resume. She cared about what he could do. And what he could do, it turned out, was extraordinary. The years on the street had not dulled his mind. If anything, they had sharpened it. He had spent 6 years looking at buildings from the outside, studying their foundations and their facades and their structural details with the involuntary professional eye of a man who couldn't stop seeing the bones beneath the skin. He was good. He was more than good. He was the kind of engineer who made other engineers better, the kind who asked the right questions and caught the things that others missed, and brought a depth of experience and a humility that came from having lost everything and rebuilt from nothing. Within a year, he had been promoted. Within 2 years, he was managing projects. Within 3 years, Patricia was talking about making him a partner. But that's getting ahead of the story, because something else happened. Something that Thomas didn't expect and didn't plan and didn't know how to process when it arrived at his door. It was a Saturday morning, about 4 months after he had started the new job. He was sitting in his room in East Harlem, which he had since upgraded to a small one-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, his real newspaper, delivered to his real door at his real address. There was a knock. He opened the door and found a woman standing in the hallway. She was well-dressed, somewhere in her 60s, with silver hair and red-rimmed eyes and hands that were trembling slightly. It was Margaret Sinclair. Thomas didn't say anything. He just looked at her. He hadn't thought about her in months. He had filed the incident away in the vast archive of indignities that constituted his experience of homelessness and moved on. He didn't hate her. Hating her would have required him to give her a significance she didn't deserve. "How did you find me?" he asked. "The officer, Webb. I went to the precinct and asked for him. He was reluctant to give me your information, but I explained why I was there, and he eventually agreed." Thomas leaned against the doorframe. "Why are you here?" Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a speech 100 times and was now discovering that the words wouldn't come out in the right order. "I came to apologize," she said. Thomas waited. "I've been thinking about that night for months. I can't stop thinking about it. The way I screamed, the way I called the police on you, the way I looked at you like you were less than human." Her voice cracked. "You walked 80 blocks in the cold to return my ring, and I treated you like a criminal." She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. She held it out to him. Thomas looked at it. It was for $10,000. The reward money. "I don't want your money," he said. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just as a simple statement of fact. "I know you don't. That's exactly why I'm here." She took a breath. "The money is yours. You earned it." "But that's not really why I came." She looked at him with an expression that Thomas had never seen on her face, an expression that looked almost like honesty. "I came because that night changed me. I went home and I sat in my living room and I held that ring and I thought about what I had done. I thought about the kind of person who screams at a man who is trying to do something kind. I thought about the kind of person who sees a human being in need and sees only a threat. I thought about the kind of person I have become." She paused. Her hands were still shaking, and I didn't like what I saw. Thomas looked at her for a long time. He thought about Daniel, about the way his son had treated everyone with kindness, even during the worst of his illness, even when the chemo was destroying his body, and the pain was constant, and the future was shrinking to nothing. Daniel had never stopped being kind. He had thanked every nurse. He had made friends with every patient on the ward. He had drawn pictures for the children in the pediatric unit, even when his hands were so weak he could barely hold the crayon. Thomas had spent years trying to understand where that kindness came from, how a 17-year-old boy dying in a hospital bed could have more grace and generosity than most healthy adults. And the answer, he had finally decided, was that kindness wasn't something you had to earn or learn or achieve. It was something you had to choose every day, in every moment, especially the hard ones. "Come in," Thomas said. They sat in his kitchen. He made coffee. She told him about her life, and for the first time, she told the truth about it. Not the version she presented at charity galas and board meetings. The real version, the lonely version, the version where the brownstone was beautiful and empty, and her husband had been sleeping in a separate bedroom for 5 years, and her children called once a month out of obligation, and her friends were not really friends, but allies in a social war that never ended and never produced any winners. Thomas listened. He didn't judge. He didn't console. He didn't offer advice. He just listened, because he knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for another person is simply sit across from them and let them be heard. When she was finished, she asked him about his life, and he told her about Sarah, about Daniel, about the cancer and the grief and the streets and the library and the ring on the ledge and the long walk in the cold. Margaret cried. She cried the way people cry when they have been holding something in for a very long time and the walls finally give way. Not delicate tears, real tears, the kind that distort your face and make you ugly and human and real. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Not just for what I did, for everything you've been through." Thomas nodded. "Thank you." She left the check on the kitchen table when she went. Thomas looked at it for a long time after she was gone. $10,000. 4 months ago, it would have meant everything. Now, it meant something different, not less, just different. He endorsed the check and deposited it in his bank account, and then he wrote a second check for the same amount and mailed it to Bridge to Home, the organization that had helped him get back on his feet, because the money had never been the point. Margaret Sinclair went home that night and did something she had never done in 61 years of living in New York City. She walked past a homeless man on the corner of 86th and Lexington, and she stopped. She looked at him. She made eye contact. She saw him. He was sitting on a milk crate, wrapped in a blanket that was more holes than fabric, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Anything helps. God bless." He was about Thomas's age. He had the same weathered skin, the same tired eyes, the same look of a man who had been overlooked so many times that he had started to believe he was genuinely invisible. Margaret stood there on the sidewalk, and she thought about every homeless person she had ever walked past, every pair of outstretched hands she had ignored, every human being she had treated like a piece of furniture, thousands of them, over decades, an entire lifetime of looking away. And she was ashamed, deeply, profoundly, viscerally ashamed, not the kind of shame that comes from getting caught, the kind that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. And she said, "Can I buy you dinner?" The man looked up at her with an expression of such surprise that it almost made her laugh. Almost. She was too close to crying to laugh. "Really?" he said. "Really?" They walked to a diner on 3rd Avenue and sat across from each other in a booth by the window, and Margaret listened to his story the way Thomas had listened to hers. And when they were done, she went home and called the Manhattan Arts Council and told them she had changed her mind about the public art installation in the low-income neighborhood. She wanted to fund it personally, all of it. It was a small thing, a tiny thing, in the grand scheme of a city of 8 million people with 100,000 problems. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, Thomas had learned, were the hardest part. 6 months later, Thomas got a phone call. It was Sarah. She had seen a news article. Someone had written a story about the homeless man who returned a diamond ring, and it had gone viral in the way that stories of unexpected goodness sometimes do, cutting through the noise and the cynicism and the endless scroll of bad news like a beam of light through a dirty window. Sarah had read the article. She had recognized the name. She had sat in her kitchen in Portland and read it 3 times, and then she had picked up the phone. "Tom," she said. He hadn't heard her voice in 4 years. It was the same, exactly the same. The same warmth, the same music, the same way of saying his name that made the whole world feel like it was, holding its breath. "Hi, Sarah." They talked for 3 hours. They talked about Daniel, about the years apart, about the streets and the ring and the officer and the woman and the long winding road that had brought Thomas from the lowest point of his life to a small apartment in Washington Heights with a job and a license and a cup of coffee that was his. Sarah cried. Thomas cried. And somewhere in the conversation, between the tears and the memories and the years of silence, something cracked open. Not the old love exactly, not the marriage they had shared, but something new, something that had been growing in the dark, like a seed planted in soil that everyone had given up on, quietly putting down roots, waiting for the rain. She came to visit him in December. She took the train from Portland, 5 days on Amtrak across the country, because she said she wanted the time to think. She arrived at Penn Station on a Wednesday evening with a small suitcase and the same freckles and the same eyes, and a few more lines on her face that only made her more beautiful. Thomas met her on the platform. They stood there, 2 people who had survived the unsurvivable, looking at each other across the years, and the grief and the distance. "You look good, Tom," she said. "You look better," he said. She laughed. That laugh, that music. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. They walked through the city together, slowly, the way you walk when you're relearning a landscape that used to be home. They visited Daniel's favorite places, the Museum of Natural History, where he had spent hours in the planetarium staring up at the projected stars, the pizza place on Broadway, where they used to go as a family every Friday night, the bench in Central Park, where Daniel had once sat with his cello and played Bach's Suite No. 1 for an audience of pigeons and joggers, and one old man who had stopped and wept. They stood at that bench together, Sarah and Thomas, and they didn't say anything. They just stood there, feeling the weight and the lightness of memory, feeling the presence of their son in the cold December air, and knowing that some things don't end when a heart stops beating. Some things live on, in the people who loved you, in the places where you laughed, in the music you left behind. Sarah stayed for a week. She slept in his apartment, on the bed, while he insisted on taking the couch, and they spent every day together, walking, talking, remembering, slowly, carefully, learning how to be in each other's presence again, without the crushing weight of shared grief pulling them under. On her last night in the city, they went to a small Italian restaurant in the village. It was the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and an old man in the corner playing violin. They ordered pasta and red wine and sat across from each other, and for the first time in years, the silence between them felt comfortable, not empty, not filled with the things they couldn't say, just comfortable, like the silence between two people who know each other so well that words are optional. "I still have my ring," Sarah said. She pulled a chain from under her shirt. The simple gold band hung from it, resting against her heart. Thomas looked at it. He thought about Margaret's diamond, 6 carats, platinum, worth more than most people's houses. And then he looked at this simple gold band, bought for $200 in the East Village by 2 kids who didn't know anything about the world, except that they wanted to face it together. "I lost mine," he said, "somewhere on the streets." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "That's okay, Tom. We'll get new ones." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a promise. It was something smaller and more honest than that. It was 2 people who had walked through the fire separately and come out the other side, scarred but alive, looking at each other and deciding that maybe they didn't have to walk alone anymore. Thomas never got his old life back. That life was gone. Daniel was gone. The house in Brooklyn was gone. The years were gone. You can't unlose the things you've lost. You can't ungrieve the grief. You can't make the past unhappen, but you can build something new. And that's what Thomas did. He built a new life. Not from money or luck or the kind of dramatic reversal that makes for good television, from something quieter, something harder to see, something that doesn't photograph well and doesn't trend on social media and doesn't win awards. He built a new life from decency, from the simple, stubborn, unshakable decision to be a good man in a world that doesn't always reward goodness, to return the ring, to walk 80 blocks in the cold, to set the diamond down on the doorstep and walk away, to say keep it and mean it, to build things that stand, to love a son who is gone, to hold a photograph against your chest and remember Officer Marcus. Webb was promoted to detective the following year. He continued to volunteer at Bridge to Home on weekends. Every time a new case came across his desk involving a homeless person, he thought of Thomas. He thought of the man on the sidewalk, and he made sure every single time that the person in front of him was seen. Not as a case number, not as a problem, as a person. Patricia Chen made Thomas a partner in the firm 3 years after he started. They changed the name. It was now Chen and Whitfield Structural Engineering. Thomas stood in the new office looking at his name on the door, and he thought about the cardboard box on the sidewalk outside the shoe repair shop. The distance between those 2 places was not measured in blocks or in years. It was measured in choices, one good choice after another, stacked up like bricks, until something stood where nothing had been before. Sarah moved back to New York. Not immediately, not dramatically. Slowly, the way real things happen, she found a teaching position at a school in Queens, not far from the one where she had taught before. She and Thomas got an apartment together in Brooklyn. A different neighborhood, a different building, a different life, but the same 2 people held together by the same love that had survived cancer and grief and years apart, and the kind of loss that destroys most people, but somehow had not destroyed them. They bought new wedding rings, simple gold bands, from the same jewelry store in the East Village, which against all odds was still there. The ring sits on Margaret Sinclair's finger to this day. She wears it everywhere, but now, when she looks at it, she doesn't see 6 carats and platinum and the envious glances of other women. She sees a homeless man standing on her doorstep in the cold, holding out his hand, offering her something far more valuable than a diamond, offering her the truth about who he was and who she wasn't. And every time she looks at that ring, she remembers a man who had nothing and gave everything. A man who walked 80 blocks in worn-out shoes to do the right thing for a woman who didn't deserve it. A man who proved, on a cold November night, on a doorstep on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, that the measure of a human being is not what they have, it's what they do when they have nothing. She remembers and she tries to be better. That's not nothing. In fact, in a world this broken, in a city this cold, in a life this short, it might just be everything.